What's up, welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of F1, being marketed as F1 the Movie, the new sports drama film from Joseph Kosinski, starring Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, Kerry Condon, and Javier Bardem. This film is Kosinski's true follow-up to his massive hit Top Gun Maverick from a few years ago. And this is also the latest blockbuster effort from Apple Studios with a full theatrical release from Warner Brothers. I'm going to talk about this movie in terms of just how it works as a film and for film fans, and also what it means and how it goes for Formula One fans, of which I am both. Now, of course, there's been a lot of hype for this movie because obviously it was Kosinski's follow-up to Maverick in terms of what he was able to communicate with that movie, both in terms of emotional payoff and just pure action filmmaking. Very exciting. Of course, Brad Pitt in a starring role, very exciting. But also because this was a Formula One movie with the full participation of Formula One, of course, the racing series in real life. And as a result, this film was extensively shot during the Formula One season, both the 2023 season and also the 2024 season, because of course filming got delayed due to the writer's strike in 23. So if you're a fan of Formula One, a big one or a small one for that matter, you will recognize things about this movie, namely various drivers, including the most famous of them all, are in this movie, not really in speaking roles, but they're there as participants within, of course, this fictional story being told in the Formula One World Championship. I think that's really cool grounding. And of course, when you combine that with shooting on track at some of the most iconic tracks that Formula One races at, such as Spa, Monza, and Silverstone, they also go to Abu Dhabi as well. It just really brings an authenticity. Of course, this film was shot the car they used was actually like a modified Formula 2 car. So this was a real, like, true single-seater racing car used to make this movie. So I think all of that going in just brought a lot of attention and interest for the movie, I think, kind of from all corners. And if you think about, racing movies, I think racing movies have often been really great. Honestly, you think about, recently, there hasn't been a ton of them. Of course, they're generally expensive to make, but there has been some notable ones. Of course, Michael Mann's Ferrari most recently, Ron Howard's Rush, James Mangold's Ford versus Ferrari, of course, the classics Grand Prix and Le Mans from the late 60s, early 70s time, and having one, shot today with all the action chops of someone like Kosinski. Really great opportunity. F1 the movie is a rip-roaring time. This film goes. If you're a fan of action films and drama, you will like the movie. But also, if you're a Formula One fan, you will appreciate the authenticity this movie is bringing to the table. Are we seeing outlandish things portrayed on the track? Yes. Is everything broadly plausible? Also, yes, but of course, there's some leaps that we're going through. We cut some corners in terms of communicating the story for the movie's purposes. We're not watching a race, we're watching a racing movie, so you kind of have to go at that going in. Chief among them, of course, is that Brad Pitt plays Sonny Hayes, a driver returning to Formula One 30 years after he last raced, a contemporary of Senna and Prost in the 90s. We know that that's not something that's realistic, but for the sake of the movie, it really works. Pitt's charms are on full display in the role of Sonny Hayes, and Damson Idris also does a great job as his young teammate Joshua Pierce. And if you think about the whole team that they're a part of course, Apex GP, a fictional Formula One team, Javier Bardem playing the owner of the team, someone who's, working through financing of the team and kind of throwing a Hail Mary by even bringing back his old friend and old racing buddy, Sonny. And, I think he kind of gives me kind of Lawrence Stroll vibes in terms of his energy, although he doesn't seem to have nearly as much wealth as Lawrence Stroll does in real life. So I'm not sure if there's a clean comp to who he is, but I really enjoy Bardem. Again, someone else who has a lot of charisma, really nice in this role here. Kerry Condon also plays the technical director of Apex GP. And she's someone who I think also really fits in this well, has great chemistry with Brad Pitt. I really liked her character as well. Some of the other members of the team, like the head mechanic, one of the the wheel gun mechs, like those, the social media admin. Most of those characters don't really have too much more to do Sonny and Josh's race engineers, even the team principal, Casper, who's played by Kim Bonilla of Killing Eve fame. Even he doesn't have a whole lot going on. Same for Tobias Menzies, who's a financier and backer of Cervantes, Bardem's owner character. So for the most part, I think any kind of character growth is largely relegated to the main characters, the core group there. And even still, I think if you want to compare this to Top Gun Maverick, it doesn't have nearly as much like emotional progression as that movie does. And of course, that movie, of course, being a sequel that benefits from nostalgia and so much passage of time since the original film came out, it's kind of operating in a different ball game than a movie like F1 is. So like, Brad Pitt's Sonny Hayes character, I think right away, like, you like him and his charms, but there's not like a ton of growth in his character necessarily. Like, there's broadly like formulaic beats to the progression of the plot and what happens and how the characters come together and if they find success or not in the end. Like, a lot of those beats, you can like feel them out ahead of time. But I just think the movie's really entertaining. I think right away, I saw in the early screening, and there was some F1 fans in the room. Clearly, there was kind of people like clapping and like chuckling to themselves, seeing what was being portrayed in this film in terms of Sonny, being in a backmarker car, but having these wily tactics that are skirting the rules, threatening with penalties to try and manufacture a way to get points with a bit of luck and circumstance and going against the grain with atypical strategies and stuff. Again, like, if you're a fan of Formula One, you'll probably see a lot of that coming together and see convenience and see like, oh, maybe that even is a potential thought, but would that even have actually worked? Like, you kind of have to put all that to the side because it's plausible enough and the action is communicated in certainly an authentic way. You just kind of have to go with it. And I think it was pretty funny, like, watching Sonny be a Kevin Magnussen type brick wall and, intentionally do damage and the kind of yada yada penalties while nodding to them. We never see a qualifying session, which I think makes perfect sense for the sake of the film, But I think that was pretty fun. Like, you even have like a media availability session where you have Brad Pitt there in the bullpen that we know from every race weekend, and you have Fernando Alonso himself go up and say "nice job" to Sonny, acknowledging the tactics, which is like such a Alonso thing. So like, I just love like those little details there. Similarly, you have Sonny holding up Verstappen for a little bit, and Max giving him the finger as he finally gets on by. Again, something that feels very real. I loved at the very end, just from the racing at Abu Dhabi, that Lewis is presented as the final driver that needs to be passed. Obviously, this is like 23, 24 time. He's still at Mercedes, the way this film was shot. Lewis is the producer on the movie, so I don't begrudge him for inserting himself into that. Of course, he doesn't speak any words in the movie; he's just kind of there. I think that was cool. Josh Pierce character, Damson Idris, probably best known from FX's Snowfall, but I think he's good in this role because he communicates something really real, which is like the desperation of being a driver in a backmarker team and the fleeting nature of your career in the championship when you have limited opportunity to prove yourself. And his precociousness, his headstrongness, and how he clashes with Sonny and that teammate dynamic, which of course is so real in real life racing as well, and how they finally come together and unite and work together to finally get through and find success despite all of the chips stacked against them and their small team at the back of the grid. Again, I think that all is quite enjoyable. If we think about the action itself, I mean, there was various angles that are communicated within the car. I think we spent a lot of time, on close-up of the drivers' faces, which makes perfect sense in terms of trying to communicate some kind of emotion while in the car. But I think the speed, the thrill of the energy of the racing looks real. Like, as an F1 fan, like, it felt good, it looked good, and because the movie is ratcheting up the drama because it's a film, you're really like on the edge of your seat watching these races. And what I actually thought was pretty amusing is watching some of these is they intersperse some real life F1 racing stuff that happens. Like, I think very vividly in this movie, they go to the Mexico Grand Prix, and this was at 2023 when Sergio Perez went off and crashed at turn 1 of lap 1. And they actually show that in the movie, and they show like Sonny and Josh like, getting through the traffic and moving up as a result. But that was actually grounded in like real life thing that happened at that race, 2 years ago. I thought that was pretty cool. I did recognize a few moments like that. Also a bit of a time capsule in addition to Lewis being at Mercedes, Perez still being in the championship. You have Will Buxton as one of the big media talking heads in the film. He has a few scenes. Of course, Will Buxton has since moved on to IndyCar, but I enjoyed seeing him. Of course, he's a familiar face to Formula One Drive to Survive fans, of course, on Netflix. I think there's one thing that might irk like the actual racing fan. It's you have the commentary from the Sky Sports commentators in real life, David Croft and Martin Brundle, and the commentary that they're giving in the movie is unsurprisingly a lot more expository and just explanatory than they would normally do during a race. And they explain things during the time for races. Of course, the audience always has new people coming in, but they're really like highlighting what things mean in terms of like safety cars and tires and stuff, just to make sure the layman who's watching the movie understands. Again, I think that's something you have to just be okay with, even if it's a bit unrealistic in terms of how you would really go through the race. Ultimately, I think this is a film that's really about the spectacle first. So like you wouldn't necessarily clamor for a sequel for this movie. You could certainly make one, but given the very high cost of making this in terms of all the, on location shooting around the world at various tracks, like unsurprisingly, it was a big undertaking. And I'm just so happy that it really came together post-strike as well as it has. And I really hope this film does well, because this is really like a big test for Apple's future movie output. They, of course, will continue to make movies. It's really just a question of whether they get theatrically released. Of course, Killers of the Flower Moon was an expensive movie that didn't make as much as they wanted. Fly Me to the Moon didn't do too well. And then, of course, last fall, they infamously pulled Wolfs, the John Watts, George Clooney, Brad Pitt film, from a theatrical release and released it just on the service. Earlier this year, they released a Guy Ritchie film straight to the service. Guy Ritchie's someone with a pretty strong track record at the box office at that. So I really hope F1 works, because I want Apple in their deep pockets to continue to make big movies like this. So we really want, and this is a film that needs to be seen on the big screen, given, Kosinski's chops in terms of filmmaking and action credibility. So I really hope the film does well. I think we can expect a good international audience to this, given how global F1 is as a sport. So I really hope the marketing, works in that regard. There's been the F1 the movie soundtrack that's been released in the lead up to this. You do hear some of those songs during the run of this movie. There was one moment that I was able to predict. I thought that was pretty obvious. That would of course be Rosé's "Messy" off that soundtrack. Unsurprisingly, they blast that chorus as soon as you see the scene of Sonny and Carrie Condon's character making out, as seen in the trailer. Like, that was the easiest layup. You knew they would score it that way, but I think it really works. And the actual score is from Hans Zimmer, and Hans, unsurprisingly, makes an impact as well. So yeah, I really liked F1. I liked it as a racing movie. I liked it as a big fan of Formula One, someone who watches every race, who watches every qualifying every week. I think it satisfies both parties. I think if you're being an overly nitpicky kind of viewer as an F1 fan, you're kind of missing the point of watching something like this. You're not watching a race, you're watching a racing movie. You don't want to watch something that's a facsimile of an actual race weekend most of the time. This is the better way to do it. So I think people that might be defensive and feel like they don't want something like this to exist, I think those people need to have a bit more of an open mind, or at least understand why maybe it's just not for them. To me, though, I think it's a great success, and I'm really hoping it does well. Let me know, though, what did you think of F1, the movie? What did you like most about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.